The sun, a pale disk in the smoke-filled sky, had barely risen over Deir al-Balah on June 25, 2025. The first rays struggled to pierce the haze, casting long, distorted shadows across the ravaged landscape. But the line, a testament to resilience and desperation, had already formed hours before dawn. People began gathering in the pre-dawn darkness, their hopes pinned on the promise of aid. It snaked through rubble-strewn streets, a silent testament to a community pushed to the very edge of survival, a stark reminder of the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Each broken brick, each shattered window, whispered tales of loss and endurance. Here, men, women and children stood for hours, their bodies weary, their spirits tested, united by a single desperate need. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, etched with the lines of worry and hardship, yet still held a fragile hope, a flicker of belief that today might be different. They waited not for political statements or empty promises but for flour, water, anything at all, to keep themselves and their families alive for another day, to stave off the gnawing hunger. This queue was more than just a line. It was the last defense against starvation, a lifeline in a sea of despair, a symbol of their unwavering will to live. It was a thread, thin but unbroken, connecting Gaza to the world's conscience, a plea for help echoing across borders and oceans. Every rumor, every whisper of an approaching aid convoy sent a ripple of anticipation, a wave of renewed hope through the weary crowd. Parents clutched their children tighter, shielding them from the harsh realities, while elders leaned heavily on their canes, their faces etched with the memories of countless hardships, all risking the potential chaos for even the smallest chance at food. The arrival of an aid truck was a lottery of life, a moment pregnant with possibility and peril. It was a chance to bake bread, to offer a child more than just an empty promise, to restore a semblance of normalcy to their shattered lives. But all too quickly, hope curdled into horror, the promise of salvation turning into a nightmare. The distant rumble of the approaching trucks was suddenly drowned out by the terrifying sounds of gunfire, the piercing screams of the injured, and the sickening thud of bodies falling to the ground. The flour they had waited for, the symbol of sustenance and survival, was scattered across the ground, stained crimson with blood, a grim testament to the day's tragic events. The day that had begun with a fragile glimmer of hope ended in a senseless massacre, a brutal reminder of the fragility of life in Gaza, leaving the survivors of Gaza to ask the world, their eyes filled with grief and disbelief, when does the world's responsibility to protect finally begin? To grasp the tragedy of June 25th, you must understand Gaza's landscape of despair. Since late 2023, relentless conflict and blockade have starved Gaza of food, water, medicine, and fuel. Infrastructure lies in ruins, families drink contaminated water, and malnutrition is rampant. The UN's warnings of famine went unheeded as aid became a lifeline, yet even that was perilous to access. Israel's restrictions, citing security and claims of aid diversion, created a bottleneck of desperation. Trucks permitted to enter were swarmed by starving crowds, order collapsing under sheer need. Criminal gangs and armed groups exploited the chaos, looting and controlling scarce resources. The suspension of aid to northern Gaza left hundreds of thousands cut off, forced to risk everything for food. Aid lines became flashpoints, where desperation, chaos, and military violence collided in a disaster waiting to happen. On June 25th, anticipation filled Deir al-Balah as a flour convoy was set to arrive. Thousands gathered at a dusty intersection hoping for bread. SOM, a local security unit, tried to impose order but hunger overwhelmed all attempts. The trucks arrived mid-morning, the crowd surged forward desperate. Guards shouted for order, but famine knows no rules. Suddenly, gunfire erupted, first sharp pops, then heavier bursts. Panic exploded, people trampled each other, fleeing bullets and chaos. Within minutes, hope turned to carnage. Bodies lay among burst sacks of flour, blood mixing with dust. Survivors screamed, dragging the wounded away. At least 18 Palestinians died, civilians, a child, and SOM members among them. The aid convoy, meant to save lives, became a catalyst for death. The accounts from those who survived the horrific incident paint a picture of utter chaos and desperation. Survivors' voices reveal the confusion and terror that gripped the aid distribution site that day. Their testimonies offer a glimpse into the unimaginable conditions and the desperate struggle for survival. Fatima, a mother of 4, desperately seeking food for her children, recalled, "We saw the trucks arriving and a wave of hope washed over us. Everyone surged forward, driven by hunger and need. The crowd was immense, a sea of faces all focused on the promise of aid. Then, without warning, shooting erupted. I initially thought it was celebratory gunfire, a misguided expression of relief. But the illusion shattered when the man standing right next to me suddenly fell to the ground, lifeless. The sound of gunfire ripped through the air, replacing hope with sheer terror. People screamed, a chorus of fear and pain, and ran in every direction, desperately seeking escape from the sudden violence. Ahmed, who was there to help his elderly and frail father receive assistance, insisted, "The first shots, I am certain, came directly from the Israeli side. There is no doubt in my mind." Drones were constantly overhead, their presence adding to the sense of unease and surveillance. The Palestinian guards, few in number, bravely tried to maintain order and help distribute the aid, but the Israelis callously shot at them and directly into the already panicked crowd, exacerbating the situation. Other accounts describe a chaotic confrontation between members of SAM, a local security force, and a rival gang, both vying for control and attempting to seize the desperately needed aid for their own purposes. There was shouting, escalating into a frenzy, pushing and shoving as people fought for their place in line. Then suddenly someone fired a shot, a single crack that shattered the fragile order. After that initial shot, complete and utter chaos descended. Then a much larger and more sustained barrage of shooting started, seemingly coming from the drones hovering above. These conflicting accounts, though difficult to reconcile, point to the grim reality of both internal strife and the devastating impact of external attacks on an already vulnerable population. The truth remains elusive and tangled in a web of accusations and denials. Was this a deliberate and calculated Israeli strike targeting civilians? Was it a tragic stampede triggered by panic and desperation? Or was it a deadly and horrific mix of both, a confluence of factors that led to unimaginable loss? But for the grieving families left behind, the precise distinction is ultimately meaningless. Their loved ones, fathers, mothers, sons and daughters are gone forever, their lives tragically cut short while simply seeking a loaf of bread to feed their families. The already difficult search for accountability and justice is further complicated, and lost in a sea of conflicting claims and counterclaims, leaving only the stark and undeniable certainty of profound and irreversible loss. The fog of war, thick with misinformation and propaganda, obscures the objective facts, making it difficult to discern the truth. But the immense suffering and pain etched on the faces of the survivors is undeniably clear for all to see. Innocent civilians, not armed combatants, bore the brunt of the violence and ultimately paid the ultimate price with their lives. The tragic massacre's enduring legacy is one of deep confusion, inconsolable grief, and a profound sense of shattered trust in any semblance of order or security. In the devastated landscape of Gaza, even the simple and fundamental act of waiting in line for desperately needed food has become a dangerous gamble, a potential path to a fatal end. While the world engages in endless debates about the complex details and assigning blame, the innocent victims are tragically gone, their voices silenced forever. Their stories, however, their testimonies of survival and loss, demand to be heard, amplified, and remembered, so that such tragedies may never be repeated. Official responses to the tragedy were swift and sharply divided. The IDF claimed its airstrike targeted SAM, labeling them terrorists diverting aid, not civilians. International bodies and human rights groups condemned the attack, demanding an independent investigation. The UN stressed that targeting aid workers, regardless of affiliation, is a grave violation. Human rights organizations pointed to a pattern of attacks on aid seekers, calling this incident part of a broader strategy. Even if armed individuals were present, using explosive weapons in a crowded area could be a war crime. Israel blames Hamas for embedding within civilians. Rights groups argue Israel, as occupying power, must protect civilians in aid. The world's political will remains fractured, leaving Gaza's civilians caught in the crossfire of both weapons and words. Behind the cold hard number 18 are not just statistics, but lives tragically lost and families irrevocably shattered. Each number represents a story, a potential unfulfilled, and a future stolen. We must remember that these are not just figures on a page, but real people with dreams, hopes, and loved ones. Ali, a vulnerable 12-year-old boy, driven by hunger, went to the aid line with his uncle, desperately hoping for a bag of flour to feed his family. He was just a child, caught in circumstances beyond his control, seeking the most basic necessity of life. Tragically, he never returned home, his family forever marked by his absence. His death, like the deaths of so many other innocent children, stands as a stark indictment of a world that allows children to die while waiting for something as fundamental as food. It is a stain on our collective conscience. The grim reality is that over 500 Palestinians have tragically died near aid centers since late May, a horrifying testament to the desperation and danger that pervades the region. These are not isolated incidents, but a pattern of loss. Families are forced to confront an impossible, agonizing choice: succumb to the gnawing pangs of hunger, or brave the perilous risk of death in their pursuit of sustenance. It's a choice no one should ever have to make. Each senseless attack not only destroys vital humanitarian supplies, but also erodes the already fragile trust in aid organizations and deepens the pervasive sense of despair among a population teetering on the brink. The victims were fathers, providers, sons, carrying the hopes of their families, teachers, imparting knowledge and shaping young minds, students, familiar faces, integral members of a community living under constant siege and unimaginable strain. Even SOM members killed were mourned as neighbors, as people who were part of the community, not just as nameless operatives. Their loss is felt by all. With every attack, the chaos and desperation at aid lines intensifies, creating an increasingly dangerous environment that makes future distributions even more perilous and difficult to manage. The desperate return to these aid lines highlights the cruel paradox in which they are trapped. The very act of trying to survive, of seeking essential sustenance, could be the very thing that tragically ends their lives. The devastating human cost is measured not only in the mounting number of bodies, but also in the pervasive terror, the crushing despair, and the slow, agonizing death of hope within a community pushed to its absolute limits. News of the massacre sparked global outrage. Governments from Spain, Ireland, Norway, and others condemned the attack as a violation of humanitarian law, calling for a ceasefire and unimpeded aid. The EU's foreign policy chief and the UN demanded accountability and protection for civilians. Online hashtags like #GazaAidMassacre trended and protests erupted worldwide. Public outcry amplified official condemnation, but deep geopolitical divisions stalled action. Key Israeli allies offered muted responses, calling for investigations but avoiding blame. The Security Council debated, but political inertia prevailed. The world's outrage was palpable, but meaningful change remained elusive. For Gaza, the tragedy risks becoming just another headline, unless the world acts. The tragedy also exposed Gaza's internal fragmentation. Hamas's weakened grip has left a power vacuum filled by clans and criminal gangs vying for control. The SOM unit's presence at the aid line showed Hamas's attempt to reassert order, but chaos prevailed. Armed groups exploit the crisis, looting aid and fighting for turf. Aid workers now face threats from both military attacks and internal violence. Hamas's declining support and inability to protect civilians erode its legitimacy. Without restored civil order, delivering food remains life-threatening. The Deir al-Balah massacre is a symptom of deeper collapse. External attacks and internal chaos both claim lives. The dust has not settled in Deir al-Balah, but the tragedy's echoes are global. This massacre is a symbol of moral failure, where seeking food becomes a death sentence. Gaza's civilians are trapped between bombs, internal chaos, and a divided world. When aid convoys become scenes of carnage, hope gives way to terror, and famine accelerates. The humanitarian system is broken if aid delivery itself is deadly. This must be a wake-up call. Protecting civilians is a legal and moral imperative. The world must act, guarantee safe corridors, hold perpetrators accountable, and enforce a ceasefire. The legacy of Deir al-Balah depends on what happens next. Will this be another forgotten atrocity, or a turning point for real change? The victims were not combatants, they were human beings asking for bread. Their deaths demand action.